You know, people often say that weddings bring out the best in families. Well, in my case, it brought out the ugliest truth I'd been ignoring for years. I should have known that when you mix love, jealousy, and a family member who thrives on drama, the results can be catastrophic. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest time of my life, but instead, it turned into a battlefield I never signed up for. And the person firing the first shots? My very own sister. From the way she smirked across the dinner table, to the little digs she dropped in conversations, she seemed determined to remind everyone, including me, that she once had a history with my fiancé. At first, I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe she was just being thoughtless, but deep down I could feel the tension in the air, sharp enough to cut through every smile and toast. It wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was sabotage, plain and simple. And the worst part? My family seemed blind to it. What started as subtle comments quickly snowballed into something I could no longer ignore, and it set the stage for one of the most humiliating and defining moments of my life. To really understand how everything spiraled out of control, you need to know a bit about my family. I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than feelings. My parents loved to parade us around like trophies, my sister Maddie being the golden child, while I was the one expected to keep quiet, play nice, and never stir trouble. Maddie had always been the type who needed the spotlight. If I got good grades, she had to outshine me with a dramatic performance in school. If I made a new friend, somehow Maddie would swoop in and make that friend her shadow. It wasn't just competition. It was as if she couldn't breathe unless she was ahead of me. And my parents, they let it slide, always brushing it off with, "That's just Maddie being Maddie." So, when I met Jake, my fiancé, I knew in my bones she wouldn't handle it gracefully. Maddie has this way of turning every one of my joys into her playground. And sure enough, the second Jake entered the picture, she began circling, like a cat who spotted something shiny it couldn't resist. But here's the twist. Maddie wasn't interested in Jake because she liked him. She was interested because I liked him. That was her pattern. Every man I ever showed genuine affection for, she suddenly remembered having some vague connection to, or worse, tried to create one. And this time, she went all in. She started bragging about a so-called fling she'd had with Jake years ago. The way she dropped it into conversations, like casual small talk, was infuriating. I'd be sitting right there smiling politely, while she leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Oh, Jake, remember that one summer? We had such a wild time." All eyes would turn to me, waiting for my reaction, while my parents chuckled as if it were harmless fun. But it wasn't harmless. It was humiliating. And deep down, I knew Maddie wasn't just trying to ruin my wedding. She was trying to ruin me. Things really started to boil over once the wedding events began. What should have been joyful celebrations, engagement parties, bridal showers, rehearsal dinners, turned into Maddie's stage. She didn't just mention her fling with Jake once or twice. She practically built an entire comedy routine around it. At the rehearsal dinner, for example, Maddie stood up with a glass of wine in her hand and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I guess it's kind of funny that I dated the groom before my sister did. Life works in strange ways, huh?" The entire table went silent. I felt the heat rush to my face, my heart pounding so loudly I swore people could hear it. Jake froze, his jaw tightening, while my parents forced an awkward laugh, as if Maddie had told a silly joke instead of just gutting me in front of everyone. And it didn't stop there. During my bridal shower, Maddie took center stage again. She picked up one of the gifts, lingerie of all things, and winked at Jake, saying, "I'm sure this will bring back memories." The room erupted in uneasy laughter, but I saw the side eyes, the whispers. I wanted to sink into the floor. Every moment that should have celebrated me turned into another episode of Maddie's greatest hits. What cut the deepest was the fact that no one stopped her. Not my mom, who just sipped her champagne and smiled like Maddie was harmless. Not my dad, who muttered under his breath about keeping the peace. Everyone seemed willing to sacrifice my dignity just to avoid conflict. And that told me something painful. In their eyes, Maddie's comfort mattered more than my happiness. I tried to talk to Jake about it privately, and while he reassured me that Maddie meant nothing to him, I could see the stress etched into his face. He hated the games as much as I did, but he didn't want to be the one to cause a family rift. I could feel the walls closing in, and with each event, Maddie's grip on my wedding and my sanity tightened. And then came the night when Jake finally snapped. The night it all came crashing down was during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner 2 days before the wedding. Nothing fancy, just close relatives, a few laughs, a chance to relax before the chaos of the big day. But with Maddie at the table, relaxation was a pipe dream. She started early, swirling her wine glass like she was on stage, smirking as she leaned toward Jake. "You still like Italian food, don't you? I remember that one night after." She paused dramatically, as if deciding whether or not to spill some scandalous detail, then laughed and waved her hand. "Oh, never mind, some stories should stay in the past." Everyone chuckled nervously, but I could see Jake's face darken. His fork clattered against the plate as he set it down. For the first time since Maddie started her little games, he didn't just brush it off. He turned to her, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "Maddie, enough. Whatever you think happened between us wasn't real, and dragging it out in front of everyone isn't just disrespectful. It's pathetic." The entire table froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Maddie's smirk faltered, her cheeks flushing crimson. She tried to laugh it off, tossing her hair like she always did when cornered. "Wow, Jake, touchy much? I was just joking." But Jake didn't let her off the hook this time. "No, you weren't joking. You've been doing this at every event, trying to embarrass the woman I love. And I'm done pretending it's funny." My heart was racing, my palms clammy under the table. Part of me wanted to cheer, to stand up and hug him right then and there. But another part of me braced for what I knew was coming next. My parents swooping in to protect Maddie, just like they always had. And sure enough, my dad cleared his throat, glaring at Jake. "That's enough," he snapped. "This is family. You don't get to come in here and disrespect my daughter." Jake turned to him without missing a beat. "With all due respect, sir, Maddie has been disrespecting your other daughter for months, and you've done nothing." Maybe it's time someone finally stood up to her. My jaw dropped. The room was ice cold, tension so thick it was almost suffocating. For the first time in my life, someone had called out Maddie's behavior openly, without sugarcoating it, without excusing it. But my dad's face hardened, and I knew this fight wasn't over. And I was right, because what happened next almost blew the wedding apart completely. The aftermath of that dinner was like watching a grenade go off in slow motion. Maddie stormed away from the table, muttering something about Jake being obsessed with her, while my mom trailed after her, trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, my dad stayed put, his eyes drilling into me as though I had orchestrated the whole thing. Later that night, he pulled me aside into the kitchen. His voice was low, but the anger practically vibrated off him. "You need to tell Jake to apologize to Maddie. This family has enough problems without him adding fuel to the fire." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apologize? My fiancé had just defended me in a way my parents never had, and now he was the villain? I stared at my dad, waiting for him to backtrack, to realize how twisted his words sounded, but he didn't. His loyalty was already spoken for, and it wasn't with me. I remember my chest tightening, my voice trembling as I told him, "If you're asking me to choose between keeping Maddie comfortable and standing by the man I love, then you've already lost me." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Finally, he muttered, "Don't forget who paid for this wedding." That sentence landed like a slap across my face. It wasn't just about Maddie anymore. It was about control, about reminding me that in his eyes I was still the daughter who should fall in line. Word spread quickly among relatives. Some whispered that Jake was right, that Maddie had crossed a line. Others claimed Jake had disrespected family boundaries. The house felt split down the middle, with alliances forming like we were preparing for war. And me? I felt like a bride standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering whether the ground beneath me would hold long enough to make it to the altar. What I didn't know was that the real tipping point was just around the corner, and it would come from the one person I least expected. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. My wedding was less than 48 hours away, and instead of feeling like a bride-to-be, I felt like a soldier gearing up for battle. I was half convinced my father would follow through on his threat to cancel everything just to appease Maddie. But then something unexpected happened. My dad showed up at my door, looking 10 years older than he had the night before. His eyes were tired, his voice stripped of its usual authority. He asked if we could talk. We sat down in the living room, the morning light cutting sharp lines across the floor. He took a deep breath and said, "I replayed everything Jake said last night, and the truth is, he wasn't wrong. I've been protecting Maddie for so long that I didn't realize how much damage she's done to you." For a moment I just stared at him, unsure if I was dreaming. This was the same man who had always leapt to Maddie's defense, who had scolded me countless times for not understanding her personality, and now he was admitting fault. He rubbed his temples almost as if the weight of his choices was finally catching up. "Your sister thrives on chaos, and I let it slide because it was easier than confronting her. But easier for me meant harder for you. I see that now." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in years I saw him not as the immovable wall of authority, but as a flawed man grappling with guilt. Then he said words I never thought I'd hear. "If Maddie shows up to the wedding with that attitude, I'll be the one to escort her out. This day is yours, not hers." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. A part of me wanted to believe him, but another part feared he'd cave again, like always. Still, that moment gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. And yet I should have known Maddie wouldn't let things end there, because on the wedding day itself, she pulled her most outrageous stunt yet. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with shaky hands but a determined heart. I told myself, today is mine. Maddie won't take this from me. The house was buzzing, bridesmaids getting their hair done, photographers snapping candids, the smell of fresh flowers filling the air. For a brief moment I actually let myself believe it would all go smoothly. Then Maddie walked in. She strutted into the bridal suite like it was her own runway, wearing a dress that could only be described as bridal. White, floor-length, sequined, complete with a plunging neckline that screamed for attention. My jaw nearly hit the floor. One of my bridesmaids whispered, "Is she kidding right now?" But Maddie just twirled, smiling as if she hadn't just broken one of the biggest unspoken wedding rules. And if that wasn't enough, she leaned against the vanity and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, if Jake ever gets cold feet, at least he knows what he's missing." The room went silent. My makeup artist froze mid-brush. My chest burned with rage, but before I could say a word, the door swung open. It was my dad. He took one look at Maddie, and for once he didn't hesitate. "Out," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the suite. Maddie blinked in disbelief, laughing nervously. "Dad, relax, I said out." His tone was final, unshakable. He stepped forward, and for the first time in our lives, Maddie realized she wasn't untouchable. She tried to argue, but he cut her off. "This day isn't about you. If you can't respect your sister, then you don't belong here." The color drained from her face. She muttered something under her breath and stormed out, her heels clacking angrily down the hall. The room erupted in whispers, but I just sat there, stunned. My dad had finally done what I'd been begging for my entire life. He chose me over Maddie, and with that I finally walked into my wedding feeling like I could breathe. But little did I know, Maddie's meltdown wouldn't end there. It would follow her home, and the fallout would change everything for our family. Once Maddie was escorted out, the ceremony unfolded like a dream. For the first time in months, there was no tension, no snide remarks lurking around the corner. It was just me, Jake, and the vows we'd written, raw, heartfelt, and ours alone. When I looked into his eyes, I felt a surge of gratitude, not only for the man he was, but for the way he'd stood firm when everyone else wavered. But weddings end, and real life always has a way of creeping back in. A week later, I started hearing whispers from extended family about Maddie. Apparently, she hadn't taken her public humiliation well. She'd gone back to her apartment, furious that my dad had betrayed her. But instead of reflecting on her own behavior, she turned her anger on her marriage. Her husband, already tired of living with her endless drama, finally had enough. Rumor had it, he'd told her, "If you can't respect your own sister on her wedding day, how do you expect to respect me?" Within weeks, Maddie packed a bag and moved back in with my parents. Suddenly, the golden child didn't seem so golden anymore. Meanwhile, something shifted in my dad. For years, he'd defended Maddie blindly, but now he was forced to live with the full force of her chaos under his roof. And without the buffer of her husband or me around to absorb the damage, he got a front-row seat to the reality I'd been living all my life. I heard from my mom that arguments became daily. My dad questioning how he'd let things spiral so far. And here's the poetic twist. The same man who once told me to keep the peace was now begging Maddie to tone down her behavior. But it was too late. Maddie had built her whole identity on being the center of attention, and losing control at my wedding had sent her into a tailspin. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life has a way of balancing the scales without us lifting a finger. While Maddie unraveled, Jake and I settled into our new life, peaceful, steady, and free of her constant meddling. Still, every now and then, I'd catch myself reflecting on how close I came to letting Maddie steal the joy from the most important day of my life. And I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't come in loud victories. It comes quietly, in watching the people who tried to break you finally trip over the chaos they created for themselves. Sitting in our living room a few weeks after the wedding, I finally let myself breathe. The flowers had wilted, the cake was gone, and the wedding dress was tucked away, but the lessons remained. I realized that family dynamics can be messy, cruel even, and sometimes the people we expect to protect us the most are the ones who falter. But here's the thing, boundaries matter. Standing firm, speaking your truth, and letting go of the need for approval from everyone in the room doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. Jake and I learned that together. My dad learned it too, the hard way. And even Maddie, whether she admits it or not, got a front-row lesson on the consequences of manipulation and attention-seeking behavior. Looking back, I'm proud of the way we handled it. Not because we humiliated anyone or got revenge, but because we preserved what truly mattered, our relationship, our joy, and the sanctity of our wedding day. In life, there will always be people who try to pull you down, who thrive on chaos and insecurity. But what counts is how you respond, calmly, firmly, and with dignity. And that's the ultimate victory, choosing peace, love, and respect over drama. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of Jake and me. It was a testament to standing up for yourself, protecting what's yours, and watching life quietly balance the scales in the background. As I hold my husband's hand, watching our future unfold, I feel an unshakable truth. Happiness isn't about silencing others. It's about refusing to let their noise define your story.